Chat. I'm Kari Reagan, and I'm the host, and I am so privileged to welcome the renowned Janice Chapman to our chat today. Thank you, Janice, for joining us.
It's a great pleasure to be asked, Carrie.
It's our pleasure for certain. So I would like to just start by sharing a little bit about Janice's background, her bio, and then we'll proceed from there. So of course, she's well known for being the author of this remarkable book, Singing and Teaching, Singing, A Holistic Approach to Classical Voice. And I believe that the second edition that's out now is 2012. Is that right?
No, there's a third edition now, so that's out.
Okay.
Yes, it looks a little bit different. It looks like that.
Terrific. Okay. I'm so glad you have that to hold up. Thank you. So Janice had a significant career in opera throughout Great Britain and, of course, concerts and recitals worldwide. She's received numerous singing awards, including the Kathleen Ferrier competition, which is a very prestigious competition in Great Britain. And as a teacher, I was thrilled to read that you had been awarded the Medal of Order of Australia for service to music as an operatic singer and a teacher. And she currently teaches at Guildhall School of Music in England, where she's joining us today. So, Janice, before we go off into talking a bit more about your pedagogical philosophy, I would love for you to share more of the personal story. What led you to singing and, of course, to be the pedagogue that you are now?
Well, I started as a singer. I sang very early on because it was in my family. And I copied what I heard around me, and I sang in church, and I loved singing. And I was also quite a sporty person. I played sport. And I think for various reasons, I was properly connected up when I was young. And I sang in a holistic way without knowing anything about it at all. And on the strength of that, I won the sort of scholarships that caused me to leave Australia and study in the United Kingdom. So I went to the Royal College of Music and the Opera Studio, the National Opera Studio as it was then, and started a professional career based on what I could do as a youngster. But then when I got underway, for various reasons, I started doubting what I was doing because I knew that I didn't know how I did it. Mm-hmm. And I could sing something really well, and the public all applauded, and the managements loved it. But there's this little gremlin inside my head the whole time going, yes, but you don't know how you did it. And for me, that, because of my particular sort of brain and my curiosity, that undermined my confidence a little bit. And when the pressures of the profession came along as well, for example, I sang Aida before I was 30, which was crazy. I sang Donna Anna at 20, Countess. I mean, roles that were very demanding and high profile. Abigail in Nabucco and The Force of Destiny, all of these in my very early years. And I was stretched in a way that made me also undo myself rather psychologically. And that combined with not being happy. The first year I went out on tour with Sadler's Wells Opera Company. I was actually on tour for 37 weeks in one season, wow, which was not what I was prepared for at all. I was not equipped to deal with that, and I really fell out of love with it, and that was very early on. And I wanted to have children, so my husband and I decided to start our family then, and I don't regret that for 1 minute. But once I'd started a family, I felt that I needed to be a good mum and not be always going off somewhere, and certainly not for any length of time. So I adjusted my career to suit my life, basically. I tried to stop singing at one point, but I couldn't. It's like a drug.
Yes.
Absolutely keeps you caught forever.
Yes.
And then I got interested in teaching, because I started just teaching in a girls' school on a Friday afternoon to teenage girls. And found that I really could feed my own curiosity. I don't think I was very good to start with. I'm sure I wasn't, in fact, but I started at the bottom. Yes. and taught and sang for many years. I mean, the same as you do, Carrie, I think, did this double thing. And then fairly early on, actually, I met Tom and Sarah Harris and got caught up in the beginning of the Voice Research Society. And that really turned on something in my brain, because I realized that there was a set of rules that the voice obeyed, and that people could understand what they were doing, which of course enhanced the doing of it eventually.
Right,
so
right.
Got very caught up in that. So basically I've been teaching for a very long time, and the singing has sort of pootled along at the same time.
Was there a teacher, a voice teacher, that was a great mentor to you at some point along your journey?
No, I can't say there was. I had a very famous English dramatic soprano that taught me, and who was really terrible teacher. She had no idea about anything, and gave me very poor instruction, except that she was so famous and so charismatic as a person. Mm-hmm. I felt that I must be really stupid, and I continued to get worse under her tutelage. Wow. So I had to find my way out of that sort of problem. And I had various teachers, but eventually I think I turned myself into the teacher that I had needed. And I think that's what my journey's become.
Yes. I think we find that, don't we, with a lot of teachers that are leading the way, and combining science and artistry to be the teachers. And I think it's because maybe it's been a hard-won fight for many of us to find the singing technique that we needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I would love to just at the talk about the first chapter of your book, where you kind of outline your pedagogical philosophy in 3 core components: the holistic approach, which is the act of singing that involves the whole person, body, mind, spirit, emotion, voice, and we'll come back to that. The physiological, which is the anatomy, muscular functions, effects of muscular interactions, and that is information based on facts. And then thirdly, and I loved this, that you included this idea of incremental, which means relating to the process of becoming greater. And you feel that singing can be broken down into manageable components, and ultimately it doesn't do any good to overwhelm a singer with too many of those components at once.
Yes. I felt all along that I was really interested in how singers learn and how they learn best. And of course it differs from singer to singer, but generally speaking, I found that there was a hierarchy of information that they could cope with. They can't cope with too much in one go. You can give them a glimpse of something, but I found anyway, I needed to deal with what was at the root cause of their problems, or what was the path for their development, starting from the floor upwards, basically, not starting from the voice down or the resonance downwards. That's just the way it worked for me. But because I had come to the conclusion through a couple of things that happened to me, that singing had to be based on primal sound, that babies, that animals, that human beings from every culture, everywhere in the world sing. And it's part of our human condition that we sing. It's very important, it's very wonderful. And that it was primal in essence, and that when we teach singing, if we give instruction that takes singers away from those primal connections, we do them a great disservice. And that took me a few years to work out. But I followed this path because it's worked amazingly well, really wonderfully well, and it's caused me to explore a singer's body, a singer's mental state, and then their voice, a way that it's quite, I'm diagnosing what's going on, but I'm looking for the way of remedializing what they're doing, which starts at the ground and works up. I mean, you can tinker away at the resonance or the articulation or tongue position and all that sort of thing. But basically, if they're not breathing and supporting, it's always going to re-offend. The problems keep coming back. And so my curiosity about how singers learn is sort of built on this slow process of getting a singer's body into the right shape, into a good postural alignment, and then getting the breathing and the support right, and then working the way up to the larynx and to the pharynx and to the resonator and the articulation. And it seems to have made a lot of sense, and it seems to work very.
And starting, Bill, as you said, with that holistic idea, the body, the mind, and the spirit first, the whole body as the foundation of your starting position.
Yeah. It was crucial, I think, because if you don't correct that, the problem keeps coming back, and it manifests itself as a problem in the way the voice sounds. It's hard to put too much expectation on it, but it seems to make a lot of sense now in light of this neurophysiologist Stephen Podgers, his work on the polyvagal theory, which I've only just come across about a week ago, and I found very exciting, because I think his work is, his understanding explains to us why the holistic approach has to be right. It's through the vagal nerve, which is so comprehensive in the body. Yeah. Every bit of our bodies is what sings.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And he talks about the fight, flight, or freeze response, essentially, the body's natural response to emotion.
Yes, that's right. I was very interested in bringing emotion into the singer, into the studio, even when singers are singing exercises, to see what happened. And if they have got emotional imagination, it helps enormously with their connection to their holistic singing. So it's a fascinating subject, and I think brain science is going to shine a light on it for us quite soon.
I agree. So Janice, talk about, so do you currently then, when your singers are vocalizing, do you have them correlate an emotion to each exercise, or is there ever a time where you allow them to really think of the technical mechanics?
I do both, Carrie. I do technical work with them, which is purely, what's happening here? What are you doing this for? And I don't do any exercises that don't have a purpose, which is shared with the student. I don't ever do vocalese that doesn't have a reason. Everything's designed to address some part of their development or some part of their corrections. But I also say, now I'd like you to sing that rolled R scale as though you were very angry, and see what happens. And then I will get them to feel the points of support in their abdominal system and say, what does that do to that? And now sing that scale as though you were very sad, and what happens to the energy. And I think it's a very interesting subject, quite complex, but I also do the technical stuff as well.
Okay. I want to just let the chatters know that we have uploaded under the chat section of the control panel as the YouTube link to Steve Podgers, Podgers, polyvagal theory. The one that we've loaded is just a little 10-minute snippet. You'll find other videos of him talking about this. And I've also uploaded a YouTube link of Janice working with someone on Primal sound. And so I wanted to make sure you know that. And please, chatters, you're welcome to begin to ask questions by typing in the question box, or you can raise your little virtual hand and I can open your mic. But Janice, let's go back for a minute, and since I just mentioned that primal sound video we've uploaded, can you talk a little bit more about this primal sound and how we might watch you in the studio? What would we see, and are there any red flags in helping people to access primal sounds?
Well, primal sound has got a requirement that you haven't already breathed in with expectations of doing something unnatural. So when a singer's been given instructions to flare the ribs and hold them out, or to lift the sternum right up, or something like that, they can't access primal sound. Primal sound can really only be accessed by standing like a primate, by standing a bit in monkey position, and by making primal noises like or whimpering or laughing or calling, all the things we do without thinking, and which are emotionally triggered. And that's very, very important. And primal sound sets us up to support abdominally and to breathe in diaphragmatically, which is really interesting, because ultimately it's only the diaphragm we breathe in with. We've got other options. I mean, we can stuff around with the rib cage, but it's not advisable. So what you end up with is a really natural in-breath, a diaphragmatic in-breath, and an abdominally supported out-breath. And you can feel the abdominal connections. You can put your hands on your waistband of your trousers or your skirt, and you can put your other fingers just above the pubic bone in there, and if you make some monkey noises standing in a slightly monkey position, you're going to feel activity in the torso. And interestingly, all the exercises that are coming from the semi-occluded vowel work, also because they involve blowing air through, they also link to these connection points. It's so valuable. And the support in the abdominal muscles basically becomes a sort of diamond shape. Got the xiphoid up just under the ribs, the waistband, and the pubic junction. And when you get those fired up quite naturally with primal sound, you've got basically really good solid support for your pressurized air, which of course you need for classical singing. It also connect to primal sound. It's very, very easy to drop the larynx into a classical setting and not have to worry about it from above.
Right.
It it's encouraged to drop, and it stays dropped, which seems quite miraculous sometimes to students who've been fighting with their larynx to try and get what they want out of it.
Right.
But it does depend enormously on this primal connection. Well, it seems to be a shortcut. Anyway.
So a couple questions. So you mentioned the rib cage. So we hear, at least in the States, there's a lot of discussion still about the appoggio breathing, right? And that sense of balance between the thorax and the abdominal muscles. So do you not spend any time talking about thoracic flexibility, or?
I train the younger singers sometimes who have got quite narrow ribs. You know, they have never done any sport and had big expansion going on. I do work their rib cage to make sure that they've got full flexibility and full use of it. But I never give instructions when they're going to sing that they should consciously expand the ribs. Certainly not that they should hold them out. Right. Nor do I like them to put on the support, especially on the waistband area, on the in-breath, because I know that's quite strong in American pedagogy, but to me that takes away the possibility of really connecting to the primal sound points. So if you jam your support on the in-breath, you basically set your body up in a situation where it's already under pressure. Whereas a splat in-breath, a release in-breath, is what you get when you're using the semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, for example, is more like an accent method breath. Splat, I say splat to students because it means let go.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful segue because I loved that splat because I talk about allow and release the abdominal wall, but in your book you use splat, which means singers, please loosen abdominal tension.
Didn't start out as that, Carrie. I started out going splat in the studio because I wanted them to release tension. It was like one of those comic book splats. And I said to a colleague of mine, oh my God, I'm going to be famous for using the word splat. That is so crude, so awful. And she said, well, I think we can make an acronym out of that, Jan. So she came up with Singers Please Loosen Abdominal Tension, which gave it a little bit of credibility.
It does. I thought that was brilliant, though. And don't we love our students? I tell you, we owe so much of what we do to our students, not only being our guinea pigs, but their brilliant minds that hand us gems like splat and give it significance. I thought it was brilliant. Well, so you also just led to another segue that I really want us to discuss, and that is the accent method, because I will tell you here in the States, it's not something we hear about. I know about it from working with the medical community, and I know that in Australia, it is used a bit, correct?
And in UK. And it's used not only with singers, but with woodwind players as well as brass players. Very interesting. It was evolved. It's a speech and language therapy technique that evolved in Denmark back between the wars, actually. And it was initially in order that people who stuttered and stammered, had vocal articulation problems, could override the stammering with airflow. So it's a system of just training the airflow mechanism so that the breath flow took over from the halting, faltering, stammering. And then they tried it with singers, and it was very, very effective, especially where singers had been perhaps ill-advisedly trained to somehow lock their bodies up. And when we first had it here in England, I can remember coming home from the workshop and trying it out myself and going, oh my God, this is so potent, because it deals with both air pressure and air flow. Now, we want some air pressure. There's no getting away without that. Right. But if you lock too many parts of the abdominal wall, especially around the belly button area, we get like a double set of brakes, and then you get constriction in the throat. And so I think some of the appoggio work has got a bit confused with the belly wall. The belly wall needs to move very slowly towards the backbone when we sing, as it does in nature. But accent method does an extreme version of it, just to condition the body to get back to neutral, to get back to a normal breathing. Well, it's normal physiology, respiratory physiology that's going to happen, and it gets it back to normal. It's very boring because you keep repeating airflow until the belly wall stops bracing itself. Once that happens, the singers have got access to some flow of air, as well as the pressurizing part of the air, which comes from the abdominal girdle. Is it making any sense? It's
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes people have misunderstood accent method, and
show that book.
They think that we mean that that's what you sing with. You don't sing with this whooshing of the belly wall. That's not the point. The point is that if you've got incorrect breathing and a very tight body for various reasons, this gets the body into condition where it can learn to go back to its holistic patterns. Right. And the holistic pattern is crucial for classical singing. This is Dr. Ron Morris, whom a lot of singing teachers know. He's a speech and language therapist and a singer, and he and Linda Hutchison have written the book, and his research is in there. It's his PhD research. And you kind of bore the body. You can do it separately from a singing lesson. That's the point, really. It's an adjunct that you can take away. the student can do a little bit of accent method during the morning, then do their singing practice. And as soon as the support kicks in and the voice kicks in, you get a resistance in the body, which means the belly wall is not totally flexible, but it's moving in the right direction, and it's moving, timing is right. It picks up in the right way. I don't know if you find this in teaching, but where you get people who do a lot of work in the gym, like 22, 23-year-old boys,
yes,
they're all up and they love their six-pack,
yes,
do all the sit-ups, and then, of course, they wonder why they've got this white noise in their vocal tract, because everything's so constricted. Works extremely well with them, but it takes a bit of time.
And I want to clarify, because you talk about this in your book, although you do use it as an adjunct. So if you feel that somebody has a great deal of abdominal tension and creating too much subglottic pressure, you would, of course, incorporate the ideas into the lesson, but you really refer out to somebody who is an expert.
Yes, I send people. In fact, I'm very lucky. There's a whole multidisciplinary team. We work as a team, and there are other teachers as well who are working in the same way. So I'm very pleased about this multidisciplinary and holistic approach that's going on all the time. And my pedagogy is laced with information from other people.
Yes.
It's probably worth mentioning that we are running a pedagogy course in Manchester in the summer for 7 days. And if anybody's curious about it, it's really for singing teachers who want to add to their skills, and also for singers who want to start teaching. So it's classicalvoicetraining.com is the website you can have a look on. There's 4 days of pedagogy and then 3 days of a singer's boot camp. And obviously the pedagogues will stay and help with the singers. So
and it's classicalvoicetraining.com. And what were the dates again?
1st to the 7th of August at Chetham's Music School in Manchester. It's we've done it twice before at Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which is the other place I work. And this time round, we're taking it up north.
And I can tell the chatters that I saw a preview of the workbook that the attendees will have a privilege of seeing, and I'm sure as part of the workshop they receive one, and it is wonderful. It looks like a wonderful workbook. I'm sorry it won't be available for those of us who may not be able to attend, but maybe someday. It's filled with many of your exercises and your principles.
Absolutely, and it's set out in a way that you can scribble all over it if you want to.
Yes, it's really wonderful. We are getting some very interesting questions, so let's take a moment before we move on to other ideas. So hi Shannon from Canada. Shannon Coates has said, so interesting, and she just wants you to clarify, do you find it detrimental to use things like a TheraBand around the waist or lower ribs to feel resistance on the inhale? You may remember. Go ahead.
I don't use resistance for the in-breath. I use my hands very much to help the singer feel some activity in the waistband on the out-breath, but that comes in like primal sound, just a fraction ahead of the sound.
Okay.
I can't see why you shouldn't be able to use TheraBands if you've got young singers who've got no rib expansion and you really want them to be aware of what they're doing. But I don't think I'd use it when they're actually singing, although I'll give it some thought.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel James Shigo says, thank you so much for the interesting matter of primal sound. What is the connection between primal sound and pure Italianate vowels?
Okay, right up my street. Thank you for that question.
That's what I thought.
Well, the Italian language, and I became very interested in this 25 years ago, I think, really. The Italian language, because we knew from speech scientists that the tongue setting in the Italian language is higher than it is in, say, English or German. And also because of the way that in the Italian language, the emotional intent of the word is always carried in the vowel and not in the consonant, like we have in English. We say, I hate you. Italians would say, I hate you. And the emotion would be in the vowel. Mm-hmm. And because of that, and because of this higher tongue position, they have automatically and for free been put onto support. I think the Italian language setting gives them a holistic support. And so they're really bad at teaching it, actually, mostly. So you hear me say that because they think everybody has it. Now, if you get the tongue in an Italian position and you get some support working, you get this tremendous bonus. I call it the sweet spot, the resonant sweet spot. When the tongue's high, the larynx can also be low at the same time if the tongue's in an Italian position, because it's higher and it's further back than in some other languages. And so it sets the Italians up with this marvelous advantage that their language gives them of both being on supported airflow and having a high tongue and an even higher soft palate and a low larynx at the same time. So I've devised an exercise called Dial a Vowel. Again, one of my students named it that, where we start with the high tongue position, mi or di, and they find their sweet spot. So by adjusting the tongue, if you just take the tongue back a tiny bit, you find your resonant sweet spot. And that can be a sort of pivot point for all the vowels to hang from that. So it's just a retraining to get to the Italian vowels, but you know, the Italian singers get support for free, really. They don't have to fight their way around it.
That's wonderful. And somewhat along this line, back into the primal sound, do you think that exploring natural impulses such as laughing and screaming can be useful in training singers? And that question is from Christopher Bogg.
I would say laughing is certainly valuable. I stop short of the screaming. I use calling, say calling down the street, hey! Whenever you do something like that, the body leaps into action quite naturally. Cry, sob. You get a slightly different laryngeal setting for those sounds, as Jo Estill discovered, and she actually analysed all of this for us, which was very valuable. Even a sound of agreement like yeah, all of those things make connections. I stop short of scream until a singer's ready to sing really great high notes. When they're well on and technically very secure, and they start singing their top Cs or the top Bs, and they feel the similarity of what's going on in the body and the lack of pressure in the voice, actually. So my theory really is that if you put the work properly into the body, the voice stays healthy and recovers very quickly from the workload. So it's efficient.
Wonderful.
That's the other thing about the method, it makes it efficient.
Which is what we're all looking for, is when the students find that sweet spot of everything, they're like, that's so easy. Right?
They love that, but they can't trust it straight away. They go, that can't be right, it's too easy.
Right. And I remind them there's nothing about what we do that's easy. It's efficient, but it's not easy.
And it's some of the battles that they've had, you know, where they've been fighting with nothing underneath their voice, and everything ends up on the jaw or the tongue root.
Yeah. From Marcello, we have a question about what is your approach for blending registers and connecting between the passaggi, and what types of holistic exercises would you do to resolve chest pull up on voices?
I do use, let me think. I've got exercises in the exercise sections of the book, which covers registration disguise, I'd call it. But if you are supporting your voice, if your abdominal muscles are doing their job properly, transitions between registers and through passaggio is very easy. It's not a big problem at all. And you've got choices of colours and things like that as well. But it's all dependent on the workload not being here in the larynx, but being down in the torso.
Mm-hmm. I can.
That doesn't.
Go ahead, Janice.
Oh, I was going to say that doesn't really answer his question, because it's a very big question, really, isn't it?
Well, but I think what I'm hearing you say, for you, a lot of it goes back to the breath energy, the support, as you call it.
Yes. I think the Podgers system is just slightly misunderstood, especially if people think of it here in the upper epigastric area of the body. I think the feeling of leaning on the breath is quite valid. It's the push and pull of muscles that impede the flow of the air and muscles that send the air out. And that push and pull happens further down, I think.
Mm-hmm. Another question, I love this question from Yvonne Redmond. She said, could you explain the approach of using monkey posture and then transitioning that into proper posture?
Yes. Very good question, actually. And of course, we're not going to come on stage looking like a monkey. But somebody went to a concert about 2 weeks ago and said the baritone did exactly that and sang like a god, but he looked like a monkey. Once the singer has made the connections in the studio, I of course encourage them to stand upright, not artificially upright, but to stand with really good balanced posture, but always keeping the knees flexible and the psoas muscles, which are the ones that join the top and bottom of the torso, the top of the legs to the base of the spine. That's very, very important that stays flexible. It feels like you could do a belly dance while you're singing, and that you're not rigid and stuck and your knees are not braced back. So this coming from monkey posture into an ordinary upright posture for singing is not so difficult. Mind you, the problem comes when singers have to go out on stage with very high-heeled shoes. Mm-hmm. They're always thrown into such an unnatural position. It's very tough.
Do you have your students, do you have limits about their shoes for auditions or recitals or whatnot?
I give them quite strong suggestions. I don't say you mustn't wear anything above 1.5 inches, but they find that out for themselves, actually.
Yes. Well, and of course, there's some interesting research, and I'm so sorry I'm not going to come up with the woman's name, but who has just in the last few years published specifically on body alignment and different heel heights. Yep. Yeah. So there's great research out there now about that kind of topic.
And that's ongoing, I think, because there's work coming from Feldenkrais and different schools of body work.
Yes.
But I'm fascinated with it all. I think it's all contributing hugely.
Thank you, everybody who's writing in. Amelia Rawlings, thank you. Thank you for helping me out. So it was Amelia Rawlings who has done this recent research on high heels. Thank you, guys. We have a wealth of knowledge out there, of course, today on our chat. So I love that. Let's go back now to some broader questions. You and I talked about earlier this week about this whole concept of the art and science of the performing voice and one influencing the other. And of course, it's a bit of a broad topic and a bit of a hot topic at times. But I love this question by Karen Bauer, who says, in the last 10 years, which specific scientific finding has most affected or changed your teaching style or approach?
Okay, well, that's a really tricky question. But I think one of the things that's made a huge input into our knowledge has been the work on semi-occluded vowels. Yeah, and Ilta has produced a system of helping singers to stabilize their singing by singing through a bubbling water system, the Dr. Box system. it's Ilter Denizoglu from Turkey who's
Yes.
developed this system, Dr. Vox. And I found that very, very valuable, especially with younger singers. And what it does, if you sing through the water bubbling, you get some back pressure. You also are producing the air very beautifully. And inside, the soft palate is absolutely ready to start a perfect onset. So there's all sorts of really good things coming out of this research. Now, this development of this little machine came for people who needed remedial work on damaged vocal folds, and I've used it for a number of singers who've had some vocal damage in their rehabilitation. Yes. But it also works a treat in the studio for people who push their voices or drive their voices, to put them onto that and have them sing a page through this bubbling water. Everything just falls straight back into position again, and they start, it just seems miraculous, but it's based in science.
Yes.
Based in science. Back pressure from the water, generating the breath from the right part of the body.
Yes. No, yep. I use it in my studio, and I absolutely love it. Although I work, of course, with injured singers as well, and I did have a student that that it did not work for. It made fatigue worse, and so next time she saw my speech path, they ran some aerodynamic measurements and found that her airflow was too high because of her lack of closure. So it actually was not useful for her.
I'm glad you found me.
Yeah, so I think it's important, right? All of these tools, first of all, they have to be taught carefully and correctly, right? And sometimes if a singer is telling you that's not working, I think we have to be careful to pay attention to them.
No, I haven't come across that yet, but I'm sure it's waiting around the corner for me somewhere.
It surprised me, I have to tell you, because luckily I, like you, have the team to kind of talk through some of this, and because they were able to do exact measurements. Otherwise, I wouldn't have understood it. So it takes a team, always.
And thank heaven for the team.
And thank heavens for the team, absolutely. And so, Janice, let's stick with this science and art in the studio for a moment. So with all of your vast knowledge, of course, and intricacies of voice science, how do you implement that in the studio? Do you leave it aside? How much do you carry with you and explain in a given lesson?
I do explain over a period of a number of lessons. I don't do any exercises that don't have a purpose. So there's, I'm always explaining. If you're saying do this scale on a rolled R, I get them to notice what their body's doing to produce that, to notice the airflow, and then to sing a scale on a vowel with the same activity going on. So, but I like to explain things, well, for example, like vocal tract issues, for example, white noise in the sound, which is usually the false vocal folds coming in and interfering quite often. And if you use a trigger like giggle, and that really clears, I do them a little drawing. I do a side view of the vocal tract with the false folds and the true folds, and show them what happens if they go to pick up the piano and the false folds close right over, and how with the effort levels being not quite right, at the level of the voice being too high, that false fold activity creates this bit of white noise in the sound. I will draw drawings and show them pictures in books and videos. I've got some video work that I did myself with Sarah Harris in the clinic, looking at semi-occluded vocal tract stuff with the scope down, obviously, and Twain, one of my favorite tools, looking at the closure of the aryepiglottic sphincter during Twain is fascinating.
It is fascinating. So talk about that for a minute, Janice, because I'm fascinated by that as well. So how would you bring that idea of twang into the studio for classical singing?
Well, I'm an Australian, so I have it naturally, as do you, in my speaking voice. So it's no big deal for me to find it, but for very nicely brought up young ladies from the south of England. It's a foreign, completely foreign to them, and they have to learn to do it, really. And I use the Dame Edna Everage character, which is Barry Humphries, one of his alter egos, who speaks like this all the time. Come along, possums. You know you really want to do this. And so some beautifully brought up sopranos from the south of England get to walk around the house going, I told you kids to bring your clothes indoors, come along now, to speak in Barry Humphries' voice for every now and again. That brings in the epiglottic narrowing, which we need. And then as soon as it's been there for a little while, and they can summon it up without any effort at all into their singing voice, which is most extraordinary when you think about it. But then again, when you think about our heritage as animals, that was a calling voice. That was a voice that carried across 3 paddocks or 3 fields or to the next mountain in Switzerland. It's got specific use in all cultures, I think, the calling voice. I think in Sweden we heard that wonderful cow calling on the first day, didn't we, of the conference?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's entirely twang, done with twang. And of course, all opera singers have to have it because that's what makes your high notes penetrate but feel extremely safe. It also helps the tuning and it helps the longevity. The note goes on for hours. They can sit on the note for ages. The only accommodation they have to have in their mind is that it sounds terrible while you're making it to you. Your own ears can't possibly feed back to you what the end product is. They always have to listen back. And I record every lesson, so they get to hear back what they've been doing.
And what you're... Go ahead.
Sorry.
You go ahead.
Oh, I can't remember now.
I'm so sorry.
I don't use it early on. I wait until I've got all of the integrity of the vocal tract and the body right. I make sure the support's there, the air's there, the posture's good, the laryngeal issues are all dealt with, and only then I add the twang for a final accessing of the top of their range.
And what you're really talking about is the singer's formant. Yes, a lot of our chatters will know this. In America, anyway, twang is really affiliated more with CCM styles of singing, contemporary commercial music. We use the term twang for that. And of course, I believe what you're referring to in the classical world, we would call singer's formant or the ring or the ping or the core of the voice.
Squillo is the Italian term for it. And without it, no singer is heard through an orchestra very well. And quite often it's damaging to the voice to not have it. So it's quite an important component. I would demonstrate it for you, but I think it'll blow your microphone out of the water.
Oh. So chatters, we're really at the 10-minute mark, and I see so many brilliant pedagogues on our list of attendees today. So please, if any of you have questions for Janice, or you can type it in or just raise your hand and I'll open your mic for you to ask. But I welcome your questions at this point. Janice, what would you say to young teachers now? Like what do you see maybe as holes in teaching or challenges in teaching? And I'm talking very broad terms. But what would you want NATS members in America to know as such an experienced pedagogue?
Don't be afraid of the science. Don't be afraid to read up, even though it looks like horrendous gobbledygook sometimes. And be brave about it and always ask. There's no dumb questions in this business. You can ask anything and people will. I mean, I've had Ingo Tietze explain things to me in words of one syllable at various points, and he's been marvelous about that. And Sundberg, likewise, some of the great scientists, they're prepared to talk to we singers and singing teachers in the very simplest terms to explain very complex ideas, because let's face it, it's still a very new science.
Yes.
And I think don't be scared of it. Just roll up your sleeves and have a little crack at it. I think you're much better in America than we are here. What's happening in England is still kind of 19th century sometimes. Although at Guildhall, I must say, we do collaborative teaching, and I have taught probably 5 of the other members of staff on the vocal department at Guildhall. So we have an open door policy there, and we have collaborative teaching, which is great and really good for the students as well. And now one of my colleagues that I've taught is taking over as head of voice at the Royal Academy of Music. So the Academy will likewise be more science orientated than some of the schools would have been in the past. Mm-hmm. But Guildhall, it's an important thing, I think, for, well, anyway, our students are going to know better than us if we're not careful. They're going to go online. They're going to look it up. They're going to understand it. And we can't afford to be left going, oh, I don't know how that works. I don't know what they're talking about. Oh, there's a graph on there. And that used to be me at the beginning. And Tom Harris and some of the other people said, look, Jan, just sit there. Every time you hear this stuff, you will understand it better. Mm-hmm. And don't panic because you don't get it all at once. And that was such good advice. Because, you know, I was a singer. I wasn't going to understand anything. And I was only educated as a female in the 1950s. So no science or anything.
Well, and I think we have to be careful. There is information out on the web, and a lot of it is misinformation. So we have a great responsibility if our students come in saying something to be able to say, okay, well, let's put this in context of evidence-based information. So, yeah, being able to correct them is as important, I think. I was going to ask you also, what would your response be to someone who thinks that experience is the best teacher? For instance, was a great debate this week on a social media forum where, and it made me sad because it kind of became people that are evidence-based or science-based in their voice teaching versus those who had a big career and are more experiential-based. My hope is that we can bridge that we don't have to have an us or a them mentality. But there are people that do believe that experience is enough. And I'm sure you're asked this a great deal. I'd love to hear your response.
Well, I think Richard Miller had it right. He said, you know, great singers don't make great teachers necessarily. They're different skill sets. If you're going to teach, you must restudy. You must be prepared to restudy because your experience as a singer is not automatically going to turn you into a good teacher. He was quite right. And this is one of the reasons why we're running the course each year now. Last year we had 47 people come on the course. And the pedagogical stuff is solid, it's evidence-based, it's physiological, there's no mystery. But by the end of the week, we get to the place where someone can come in and bring in the artistry into the room. And that's the most miraculous thing of all, that the artistry comes pouring in when there's a solid enough technique that somebody can know what's going to come out of their mouth. They're free to access the nuance of the artistry, their musicality, their drama. That's all very much easier to access because they can forget about what their voice is doing. And I mean, this multidisciplinary approach now, getting to being able to incorporate artistry into the pedagogy is so important. And it changes now as we're looking at Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. I'm beginning to think, I'm beginning to understand why it's possible sometimes for teachers to teach via artistry. They don't necessarily give the singers a technique that works forever. Sometimes it crashes for various reasons. But I guess it is possible that artistry will sometimes invoke good technical function. Although my experience has been the opposite, I have to say, that I can only really get singers artistically engaged and not thinking at all about vocal technique once they've got one.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And you know, you and I talked about you find that Americans are actually quite technically well trained. I always hear that we are better trained over here, but this artistic aspect is a bit more of a question. Would you agree with that as a broad statement?
To be that broad, there are some wonderful American singers that have access to the most exquisite artistry. So I can't say that across the board, but I do sit on audition panels sometimes. And I think, yes, that's all nicely lined up, but where's the soul? I want to hear that as well. And maybe that's waiting round the corner for somebody to unpick, to bring out into the open.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of our students more than our elite singers. Yeah, I was thinking more of that 20-something, that emerging professional singer. I often hear that from coaches and conductors that the Americans are technically really sound, but so yeah, I just wondered if there is something in our training versus the European training that is making us so technical, but without soul.
It might be access to the performances. I know that in London we're very rich in the fact that, we could go to 30 different venues on one single night and hear singing of various standards and types, but right up to the very richest sort of cultural experience. And we're very lucky with that. And I think that's an influence. There are also some very fine coaches, but I don't think that the coaching is the singing. I think vocal coaches are those people and singing teachers are those people. And unfortunately, in our system, sometimes vocal coaches turn up and call themselves singing teachers. And I'm dealing with a lovely singer at the moment who's had a complete career crash. And she said in the 6 years she was at music college, her singing teacher never once mentioned breathing and support. He coached the music, but he never ever gave her a vocal technique or suggested she needed one. So 5-10 years into the career, everything falls apart and it has to be put in properly. And then the artistry can sit in on top of that. So I see it as the science. And then above the science is this layer of craft, how we do things and good teaching. And then above that again is the artistry, the beauty, the emotions, the soul. And the artistry covers everything eventually because you don't ever have to think technically again.
I love that. It makes absolutely. And like you said, it's back to your idea of incremental learning and layering. Well, we're near the bottom of our time together, and I want to end with my dear colleague Ken Bozeman, who has written. I'm sure I know you know Ken, and he says, "Thank you, Janice, for emphasizing the primal sound that grounds voicing in our inherent impulse to communicate feeling. With that are the essential core of the technique. We should be getting less soulless technical singing."
Oh, bravo. Thank you, Ken. That's wonderful.
He is such a beautifully articulate person. And I just think that is a wonderful sentence to kind of take a moment to thank you, Janice, for your incredible work and contribution to our field. And I'm so glad you've already been given so many awards to thank you for that. And we are so grateful here at NATS for you to have taken time to join us on this Sunday night. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you very much, Mary. You've been a lovely hostess.
Well, it's been my great privilege. We are getting a ton of thank yous coming in from our chatters. And I want to remind them on February 11th, will be our next NATS chat, and it will be on the care of the professional voice with my dear colleague, Dr. Al Muradi, who is one of our most renowned laryngologists in the States and beyond. And then my dear friend, Michaela Martins, who sings at the Metropolitan Opera and all over the world. And so the two of them will join us to talk about that. Care of Professional Voice, Sunday, February 11th. And Janice, if you'll just stay on with me for a minute and we'll tell everyone else goodbye. And thank you so much for joining us at this unusual time today. We'll see you in a few weeks, everyone. Thank you again.